So welcome everyone. I'm Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom in Vero Beach, Florida. And I invited earlier in the 2022, I invited rabbinic colleagues to come and join me to teach for these 7 weeks of the Omer as we go from Passover and the Exodus from Egypt, as we march across the wilderness and head towards Mount Sinai over the course of these 7 weeks. I invited them to join me in teaching each Wednesday of this counting of the Omer, to offer different classes on different rituals. And we've had classes on candle lighting, on tzitzit, on mikveh and welcoming rituals, not mikveh and welcoming rituals, just on mikveh, and a class last week, and we learned about the Torah reading and the act of doing an aliyah. This week, we are joined by Rabbi Robert Haas, Rabbi Jeffrey Goldwasser, and Rabbi Alysa Mendelson. It is wonderful to have them with us, joining us today. They are going to be sharing their lesson on Brit Milah or bris and other welcoming rituals. And if you have, as they make their presentation, if you have questions, you can use the chat function. That is the easiest way to share a question with us. There is also a raised hand function. Both of those are the best ways to get attention, that you have a question or something to add to the discussion. And so we look forward to that discourse. Also, as we get started, each week as we have started, or as we have finished, I've acknowledged the day of the Omer. And so I'm actually going to start that way. So if folks are rushing away, they still get to acknowledge the count of the Omer. So today is the 32nd day of the Omer, which is 4 weeks and 4 days in the Omer. And that is actually very significant because tomorrow is starting tonight at sundown. Tomorrow is Lag BaOmer. It's the 33rd day of the Omer, which is a very auspicious day in this count. It was a day, there had been a horrible plague at one point among the students of the people of Israel. The plague ended on Lag BaOmer. It was also on the yard site for Shimon Bar Yochai, who's part of that story. There's a number of different rituals. The people will have bonfires. People will go get a haircut for the first time. People will get married. There are all sorts of amazing rituals on Lag BaOmer, and it just marks part of our progression as we go on this journey. Welcome. It is wonderful to have my colleagues. I am excited to learn from them. And so I am going to take the spotlight off me. And who am I pulling up first?
We're going to start with Rabbi Haas.
And so fresh from Mikve, Israel in Savannah, Georgia, we present Rabbi Robert Haas.
Welcome, everybody. It's a true pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks for joining us. I'm coming from Savannah, Georgia, Congregation Mikve Israel. I believe I'm speaking for 15 minutes. So we're going to talk a little bit about Brit Milah. And we have 3 parts between 3 rabbis, so we're all excited to be here. I have the privilege of going first, so I'm going to talk first a little bit about the ideas behind circumcision and Judaism. So, and that, of course, starts in the Bible. So for those of you who do not know, Judaism does support circumcision. It is part of our religion. In fact, I just went to one yesterday. I did the prayers. Another rabbi did the circumcision. The kid obviously likes me better. And so what we're going to talk about is first the history, and it goes all the way to the beginning. So for those of you who do not know, and I think most of you probably do, there are 3 covenants between God and human beings in the Torah. The first is with Noah. God says, I'm not going to destroy the world. Noah has to do nothing. The third covenant is between God and Moses. God's going to be their God, and Moses and the people have to follow all of these laws, the commandments. In the middle is the second covenant. That is the one between God and Abraham and Sarah, in which God says, I'm going to be your God. I'm going to do some things for you. I'm going to give you nationhood. I'm going to give you a homeland. You're going to be part of, you're going to enter into a relationship with me. And Abraham and Sarah have to do exactly one thing. There's only one thing they have to do. to become part of the covenant with God, and that is circumcise their children, preferably on the 8th day. So this is not only a commandment, it is a covenant commandment. It is the first thing we are asked to do. And so for possibly 4,000 years, which is a pretty long time, we have been engaged in Brit Milah. In fact, Brit Milah means the covenant of circumcision. Milah, circumcision, Brit is covenant. And so that alone tells us how essential this is. Now,
Rabbi Haas?
Yes,
Just
can you
to
hear me?
clarify, only male children.
Only male children. And we'll talk about that issue when we get to Africa in a second. So now as for the rules, obviously we come later, we'll talk about that, but I'm just talking about the biblical belief. And it is so important that if you do not circumcise your child, you are considered cut off from something. You're considered cut off. Now, we don't know exactly what cut off means, because it's ironic that for not being circumcised, you're cut off. I hope that people get that ironic statement there. But that's how important. In fact, it is mentioned several times in the Bible, and every time it is shown the importance. We know of the story of rape of Dinah, where Dinah is possibly raped or falls in love with a non-Jewish guy. She wants to marry him, and her family says, if she's going to marry this guy, you and all of your people are going to have to be circumcised. And of course, they take advantage and kill all the people who have just been circumcised, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is the covenant with God between Abraham and Sarah. Moses' wife is told she is going to be in dire need if she does not circumcise her 2 children, Gershom and Eliezer. So the punishment for not circumcising is evident even here on the mother, and we're not sure why Moses hadn't circumcised his children as of yet. We also know that when the Israelites go into the land of Israel, or Canaan, after 40 years, so we're entering to the book of Joshua. Joshua, one of the first thing he says is, now everybody has to be circumcised. We're not sure why they weren't circumcised in the desert, because we believe those leaving were circumcised. But even here, and this is again post-Torah, and not only that, the word circumcise is used for other reasons. For instance, Jeremiah says, all of these nations are uncircumcised, speaking about non-Israelites, but this says all of the house of Israel are uncircumcised of the heart. That is an insult. Uncircumcised of the heart is an insult, which shows the essential nature of circumcision, because uncircumcised is now a euphemism for other things. Uncircumcised means you are doing something wrong. Queen Jezebel, when she is ruling basically Israel, the northern kingdom, she abandons circumcision for her people. And who then comes and is the promoter of circumcision and does it with zeal? A guy named Elijah. Elijah goes against her and says, we must be circumcised. That is the covenant. And so if you go to a circumcision, a Brit Milah, where does the baby and where does the person who's holding the baby sit? In the chair of Elijah. And if Elijah supports it, you know it's probably important, because Elijah was a major character. During Hellenistic times, Jews were not allowed in some places to be circumcised. Antiochus, the story of Hanukkah, tells them you can't be circumcised. And that's one of the reasons there's a rebellion. The same thing with the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Hadrian says that you can't be circumcised. He proscribes it, and there's a rebellion. So this is what we talk about when we talk about the importance of circumcision. It goes all the way back to the Bible itself, to the Torah, and it continues to be essential even into this day. Now, we know it's important in the Jewish world. The question is, are we alone in doing this? And the answer is no. Now, let me see if I can share my screen. It's not giving me I should be able to, but it's not letting me. Let's see if it gives me. Okay, let's see if it tries here. All right, can anybody give me the rights to share screen? It says I'm co-host, but it's not letting me do it. So I will skip it. So what I was going to say was circumcision is not just a Jewish thing. There's about a third of the world's men are circumcised. What is interesting is the places where circumcision is prevalent would not necessarily be where you think. For instance, America, it's pretty prevalent. It's like over 60% of American men and boys are circumcised. So you say, well, America is very similar to Europe in many things. We're Western countries. We have democracies, but if you go to Europe, the circumcision rate is very low. In some countries under 10%, and the other countries under 20%. So while America is in the 60% plus, Europe is in the under 20, under 10% for every single one of its countries. There's one country in Europe, I think, where it's above 20%. So where are the places that circumcision is not done besides Europe? South America and Mexico. Rarely done in those countries. Almost never. India, almost never done. Russia and China, done at a higher rate than South America, but we're still talking 10 to 20%. Australia has a little bit higher percentage in the 50 percentile. Canada is in the 40%, but what other places is circumcision popular? And that is, hard to believe for some, Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Those are the places that are similar to America in terms of the circumcision rates. In fact, they're much higher. Why? Because circumcision is part of Islam. And so countries with Muslims or large numbers are going to have it, which is the Middle East, which in any areas is 99%. North Africa, 99%, because a lot of those countries only Muslims live. Sub-Saharan Africa, however, is also a place where a lot of people are circumcised, a much higher rate than most of the world. And this is for two reasons. One is because circumcision as an adolescent is a coming of age process in Africa. I lived there for a while, and I was visiting one of the tribes, and they tell you, I think at 15, you stand naked and are circumcised in front of your community. Very different than what we do in America when it's in the Jewish world as children, as infants, and you cannot flinch. If you flinch, it is an insult to you and your family. So at 18, when you're supposed to go out and live by yourself in the desert or wherever when you're supposed to live by yourself, if you flinched while you were getting circumcised at 15, your dad has to go with you for that year or two. And that is a major insult that your dad has to go with you. And I assume most dads do not want to go on that. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, one, it is popular because it is a rite of passage. And two, because the HIV rates are so high in Africa, the whole continent has basically really promoted circumcision because it's been proven medically that it does bring down the rates of HIV by quite a bit, significantly. So we're not the only ones that do it, but certainly in terms of the world rates, America's pretty high, but nowhere near as high as the Middle East or North Africa. Now, finally, the last thing I want to do is, this is something extra special. I think it's the first time I've done that. Circumcision, of course, has been part of Jews who have come to America, who have come to other places. And funny enough, Savannah, which was founded in 1733, we're the third oldest Jewish synagogue in the country. But when our community was founded in 1733, the first boat of Jews brought two things with them to America: a Torah scroll and a circumcision kit. So those were the two things they brought, because one of the men on the boat was a religious Jew coming from Germany before he moved to England, and he wanted to have a circumcision kit for obvious reasons. So what I brought for you today is the first circumcision kit to come to America. I kid you not. There's one or two pieces that have been added through the years, but here it is. You can see most of the instruments, except for this one knife right here, are all, so this came in 1733. Obviously, it was not made in 1733. It was old, probably from Germany. My son is 2.5 years old. He was circumcised about 2.5 years ago. That's when we decided to stop using the circumcision kit. So it was used for roughly 286 years. For those of you who are wondering, that is a joke. We stopped using it before that, but you can see it has the cup, it has the cutting instrument that is still very familiar. I just went to one yesterday. They still use a similar instrument to this. And of course, the cup for the wine and some of the other instruments, some scissors and things that are very scary. So it is in our museum, and I took it out just for you guys and for Michael. So thank you for letting me spend time with you. It's now a pleasure to turn it over to one of the other rabbis who will now take over.
Rabbi Mendelson? Yeah, we're going to switch the spotlight over to Rabbi Mendelson. There we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rabbi Alysa Mendelson. I'm a rabbi in Port Washington, New York, which is on Long Island, which I sometimes call the land of our people. And it is lovely to be with all of you today from wherever you are and wherever you sit. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the more technical aspects of a bris and also of a simchat bat. It is important for me to be able to share my screen. So let's see if I'm able to do that now. I am. That's great. So let's see. Can everybody see my screen? Great. Awesome. So, okay. So I actually thought I'm sorry, Jeff, are you talking about any of the biblical stuff?
Nope, I'm not doing biblical.
Okay, for some reason I thought one of you, that was part of, okay. So I'm gonna add that really quickly. Let me just grab notes from somewhere else so that I can just talk about that. So, probably, actually, before I even share my screen, so just out of curiosity, how many of you have been to a bris in your life? Raise your hand if you've been to a bris. Okay. Anyone here not been to a bris? Okay. So I'm just going to tell you two quick stories. So one of my most beloved friends who grew up as a McGovern and then became a Jew later in her life. Not that there aren't people who are born as McGoverns actually and aren't Jews too, that's true, but actually in my time, less likely. And she became an observant Jew when she became a parent. And when her son was born, it was her first bris that she had ever been to. And so our friends, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of teaching, Cindy. Okay. Thanks. So our friends were, walking her through the whole thing and, trying to describe to her, what to expect, because obviously she was very nervous. And they said, don't worry, the moil, who's the guy who was coming in and was going to do the actual circumcision, he knows what he's doing. And and when why is it that as soon as I start to talk, my phone goes crazy? Okay. And they said they made some kind of joke about how after he made the ritual cut, if you will, he would put the tip in his pocket. And my brilliant friend actually believed that the tip of her son's penis had actually been like put in the moil's pocket until the end of the ceremony. That's not actually what happens. But I realized, I mean, it's a pretty crazy thing, right? But I realized at that moment that, you know, this is really a ceremony that is very, in some ways, mysterious to a lot of us. Certainly for my friend who had never even been before. But even, you know, for those of us who have, and I will just say that I have 3 sons, all of whom have been circumcised. And the first 2 were twins. And one of the hardest days of my life was when I had to do a back-to-back bris for them. You know, it was something that we wanted to do, but it's a very emotional moment for a family, and certainly for somebody who had, you know, just been, you know, is in the sleepless early days of motherhood. It was one of the greater challenges of my young parenting life. As it turns out, having teenagers is even more difficult, which is what I'm discovering now. But that being said, those are my 2, you know, first stories. So the idea of circumcising our sons is something that comes from the Bible. It comes from the book of Genesis, when God speaks to Abraham and says to him, I'm just going to ask for one of my colleagues who are co-hosts to watch the participant list and make sure you mute anyone who's not muted other than me. And God says to Abraham, and as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring to come throughout the ages. Such shall be the covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring to follow. What will this covenant, this promise, how will it be manifested between God and Abraham and all of Abraham's male descendants? It says, God says, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. At the age of 8 days, every male among you throughout the generations shall be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be marked in your flesh as an everlasting pact. This comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 17. So just as we are beginning our journey and through Torah, just as we're meeting our first patriarch and matriarch, this is what God is asking us to do, to enter into a covenant with God. Some say this is a very high bar, and I may agree. And I ask you, what do you think? What do you think it means to be asked to do this in order to be in covenant? Just a couple of other biblical texts, or one actually in the book of Leviticus. It says, God spoke to Moses, says, if a woman has a man child, on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. This is from the book of Leviticus, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Not the most exciting book in the Torah, but one that contains a lot of our laws. So it is. Some say, that this idea of circumcision of the foreskin is really just an outer sign of the circumcision of our inner hearts that we are called on to perform, as it is written, circumcise yourselves to God and take away the foreskin of your heart. And that's one way of certainly understanding it. Okay. So there are a lot of rules, and one of the things that I experience as a rabbi all the time are parents and grandparents who call me and say, we're having a boy and we want to have a bris, but we don't know what to do. We don't know who to call. We don't really know what happens. And I get the same call from grandparents all the time. And like I said, even if you've been to a bris, oftentimes these lifestyle cycle moments, it's like a once in a lifetime, maybe for your family, and for your rabbis and cantors, and certainly for Mohalim, the people who most often perform circumcision, is a regular part of our ritual life. And so I'm glad for the opportunity to speak a little bit more about it with you now. So as we read in the Torah, circumcision should take place on the 8th day after birth. And so the idea is that when on the 8th day would we do it? We could do it anytime we want, but the ideal is to do it as early in the day as you can to show your excitement about performing this mitzvah. It's not supposed to be performed at night. Some people, who are more halachically observant, if for some reason they have to do it at night, they will often draw an additional drop of blood during the day, which seems particularly icky to me, but really super important for those people who are very halachically observant. And when I say halachically observant, I mean people who follow Jewish law to the very, very letter, and to the dot of the I and the cross of the T. What happens if it's done before the 8th day? And this becomes more and more, a greater question in communities where, there are people who don't want to, are nervous about having a Jewish ritual, like having the bris on the 8th day. They want to do it in the hospital. They don't want to wait. And so there are some people who require that circumcisions that are done in the hospital, again, that there is another drop of blood drawn on the 8th day to make it official. And, as a Reform rabbi, my feeling is, and my colleagues might disagree with me, and I'm good with that, is that, it's really up to you to make an informed choice, that you need to know what what traditionally has been done, and then you need to make a choice that feels right for you and your family. I always feel like, I always feel like, the best person to do a circumcision for the most part is a moil, because that's all they do. And of course you should ask a moil. You should do your research. You do your research on any doctor you use, and you should do the same for any moil that you use to perform a circumcision. But to me, they're the ones that this is literally all they do every day. And so that's, it feels comfortable for me on the 8th day by a moil. Any moil that would be used in like a Reform community or a conservative and likely an Orthodox community has certainly been, I think I know they have a medical certification, a license to practice. They've been trained and they've gone through a long training. And oftentimes in communities that are more remote areas or where there just is no moil, communities use a doctor. And a lot of these doctors, they have to be Jewish. And oftentimes there are doctors in communities where there isn't a moil available who are trained to basically do this ritual. In our movement, in the Reform movement, and the conservative movement, both men and women perform circumcisions, either as a mohel or a mohelet or a doctor. In more religiously, halachically observant communities, that is not the case. This is something that needs to be done by a man. And often it's customary for, but not required for, a rabbi to circumcise and attend the circumcision. So my colleague showed you a ritual circumcision kit, and I'm glad it was retired well before his own son was born. But I'm sure it was well used and at the height of innovation at the time that it was created. And just in terms of the actual cutting itself, I'll just say that this is more than I ever wanted to talk about to anybody as a rabbi about penises, but I will just say there are 3 steps to a circumcision. The first part is called Milah. It's the cutting of the foreskin. The second part is called Priah. All these steps have Hebrew names. It's the removing and folding back of the mucous membrane. Who knew? And the last part is called the Mitsita, which is the suctioning of blood from the wound. And I will just say, in very ultra-Orthodox communities, there are actually mohalim that use their mouths to do this. It is like a normal part of their of the way they perform the ritual. And there have been certainly some health concerns related to this. This is not something done in more modern Jewish communities. So at the bris itself, hold on, I'm gonna just get to, okay. So at a bris or a baby naming, and we're gonna get to baby namings in a minute, there is a structure to the service. And there are also some key people at a circumcision service, or at a bris. And so if you've been to a bris, maybe if you had if you had a son and you had him circumcised, or if you had a grandchild and you had him circumcised, or he was circumcised, you might remember being asked to be one of these roles or asking someone to do this. The traditional roles are called the kvater, which is the godfather, the kvaterin, the godmother, and the sandak. And so the kvaterin is the one who is a woman who brings, these are in a traditional ceremony, the woman who would bring the child into the room and places the child into the hands of the kvater, the godfather. And then After that, the kvater and the mohel, gives the child to the mohel, who places the child in the sandak's lap. I don't know a translation for the word sandak, but the sandak is the lucky person who gets to hold the child while the child is actually being circumcised. So it shouldn't be a surprise that in a traditional bris, the sandak is always sitting. Everyone else is supposed to stand, but the sandak is sitting. And I don't know about you, that feels like a really good idea. And the sandak actually has a place of honor. He, or in our community, which could certainly be a woman, sits on a chair called the Kisei Shel Eliyahu, the chair of Eliyahu. And Eliyahu, who is considered to be the person who's going to herald, like the coming of the Messiah, in this instance is kind of the angel of this covenant, the protector of the covenant, who's guarding the child during the ceremony. So after that, the mohel does his stuff or her stuff. I've already told you there are 3 steps. Beyond that, I'm no doctor, but or a mohel or a mohelet. But begins the ceremony with the idea, with the words Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, or Baruch haba. So, and those words mean blessed are you who comes in the name of God. And really, this ceremony it's a covenant ceremony, and it's a welcoming ceremony. And so you can see in the structure of the ceremony that we are welcoming this child, and then we are also offering in a bris him the blessing, which we actually offer corresponding in a baby naming for a girl. These words, kashem sheniknas labrit ken tikanes laTorah lachupa u'lama'asim tovim. Just as you are entering into this covenant, so shall you enter into a life of Torah, of learning, of chuppah, of sacred relationships, and of ma'asim tovim, of good deeds, of mitzvot, of making the world a better place. And then in a bris or in a baby naming, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, there are other blessings that we have for a child, just simply the blessings of hope and of and of promise and of what we hope the world will be for them. So I just want to go back for a minute and just answer a couple of other questions that people also have. Like I said, the bris is supposed to happen on the 8th day. If the 8th day falls on Shabbat or on a festival, circumcision shall not be postponed. We do the bris anyway. This is like the ultimate mitzvah. This is the ultimate good deed and obligation, and we are meant to fulfill it. But if we, for some reason, have to delay a circumcision, then we can't do it on Shabbat or a festival. So, for example, all of my children were born prematurely, and were in the NICU for several weeks. So we picked the day of their bris, and we did not, we could not have picked it, we couldn't have held it on Shabbat or on Sukkot, just as an example. And so also, if a child is born on the eve of Shabbat, if you have like a chance, like a little bit of noodling to do so that you can kind of make it so that it's not in Shabbat, that's what you try to do. If the child, like I said, if a child is ill, is born prematurely, has something that happens to them, after birth, but before their bris, and the doctor says you have to delay, you can delay. And also, if the moil can't travel on Shabbat, you can do it, after as well. Like I said, the person who performs a bris is called a moil, or a mohel, or a mohelet. And like I said before, that can be those people are trained, and they can also be a doctor, or they can just be a doctor who has had the training but doesn't consider themselves a mohelet. So babies are not the only people who are circumcised. We also circumcise older children sometimes, and adults when they are converting to Judaism. This is often called this circumcision. If the person is already circumcised, then a drop of blood is drawn. This idea is called Hattafatadam. And it happens after somebody has completed their studies. So it's not like you have your circumcision, then you start to study. No, you have to make sure this is what you really want before you are taking this next step and entering into the covenant of our people. And then once you finish your studies, once you kind of have your rabbi's blessing, or the person with whom you're studying's blessing, if you will, then you have your either a circumcision or a Hattafatadam, a drop of blood drawn. Most rabbis do require, I wrote conversion, but I meant circumcision. And there are some rabbis who don't. There are some rabbis who say, actually, this is really as asking an adult male to pursue circumcision at this stage in his life is unreasonable. And so they don't require that, but they require, other things. Maybe they'll require the person to donate blood to a blood bank. Maybe they won't require them to do anything related to no blood ritual at all for their conversion. That's between the person who's choosing Judaism and their rabbi. And I just wrote here, when a baby is circumcised, usually I know for my sons, the moyel gave them a big piece of gauze with a lot of wine on it, and they started sucking on it, and that kind of kept them content and happy. And for adults who, obviously a circumcision is going to actually be painful, they may want to do it under anesthesia, and that's fine. And once everything is healed up, then you go to the mikveh for the next part of your conversion. So obviously there's a different kind of ceremony for girls. And I will just say that for some people who choose not to pursue circumcision, and I think we're talking about this later, they may choose instead to have a Brit Bat, not a Brit Bay, a Brit Bat, a baby naming ceremony to welcome their child into the covenant that way. It's a welcome ceremony. It's a welcoming ceremony. There's no tradition for it like that for a daughter found in the Torah. But sometime in the 1900s, baby naming ceremonies for girls, also known by the Hebrew word simchat bat, which means celebration of a daughter, or a brit bat, which means a daughter's covenant, became a thing. Probably, similar to when becoming a bat mitzvah became a thing. We started maybe at the same time that other things like, women's rights were being argued for across our country and around the world. Things like women having a larger role, and have even just the way we welcome girls into the covenant became something that we started thinking about differently, and women were better able to advocate on behalf of other young girls being born. When can we do a simchat bat? Unlike a bris where it's supposed to be done on the 8th day, a simchat bat can be done on the 8th day, but really can be done anytime after that. Some people choose to do it on the 30th day. Some people choose to do it. I like to do them on the child's first birthday to make the child, to make it, kind of more, to bring our tradition into another happy celebration. Just as a general, this is part of a simchat bat, but it actually can also be in some ways part of a bris. But there are synagogue blessings to welcome babies into the covenant. In more progressive communities, a baby girl's naming might just occur on a Shabbat during the first few months of the baby's life. It could occur on the 8th day of the baby's life. Both parents could go in and have an aliyah, and their name would be announced. In more traditional communities, the father of the baby girl would take an aliyah to the Torah on the first Torah reading day after the birth, and a special prayer, a Mishaberach prayer, is recited for the mother and the child, and the baby girl receives her name. And then in both instances, often the rabbi or the parents will speak about the girl's name. So that's the easiest, way. That's the quickest way to have officially welcome your daughter into the covenant, or your child who doesn't have a bris, a boy who doesn't have a bris. But really, a simchat bat can be held anywhere at any time, and they often are. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to bring your family together to celebrate a new child in the world. And I will just say that for those people who observe a bris on the 8th day, and if you've been somebody who's had to do that, it's an exhausting moment in your life, and now you're trying to plan a whole this big ceremony. So lots of people like to take advantage of the opportunity to delay and get some sleep before they plan something for their nearest and dearest. So just a couple of other things. So because the Simchat Bat is a relatively new ritual, in addition, like people have been taking this as an opportunity to also be really creative in how they welcome their baby girls. So there are lots of different things. I just picked, I found one article that I really liked that was just describing baby, rituals to welcome baby girls that involve water. There are other things, but I would say this is, and I've actually never done any of these with any of my members of my congregation, but they're really beautiful. And I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. I think I'm almost at the end of my time, but just a couple of examples of how we can be really creative with ritual and make meaning out of a sacred moment for our family. So water rituals are, meaning and symbolic in a lot of ways. And when it comes to the covenant, if you remember the story of Noah, we entered God. That was our first covenant with God, when there was the promise that God would never wipe out humanity again, with the proof, the rainbow that followed the story of Noah and the flood. Also, just other examples of water in the Torah that are important. The splitting of the Red Sea, where the Israelites, escape to freedom and begin a new life of covenant with God. And a 13th century French commentator named Meiri spells out the water as covenant connection when he talks about the forefathers who entered into the covenant with God through circumcision, and the foremothers who entered into this covenant through immersion in the mikveh. And so, the mikveh is, another place where, for some people, there's, a profound sense and sense of connection to our covenant as well. And I think we've already talked about mikveh in this class on another date. So just a couple of other things about water. Water is a powerful symbol of the source of life. Just think about the creation story in Genesis, where it separates the heavens, and then, from the heavens and and the land, and all of life kind of emerges from or around the water. There's a feminine connection to water. Think about some of the key biblical women: Sarah, who brings water to the guests who come to her in Abraham's tent; Rebecca, who brings water from the well to Isaac's servant, who then introduces her to Jacob; and Miriam, who is associated with wells anywhere wherever the Jewish people travel throughout the desert, a well, they find a well and water through Miriam. As I said, immersion through the mikveh. I love this. I thought this was a beautiful metaphor. The two places where we really are completely in a protective environment, metaphorically speaking, are, maybe the sukkah. Arguably, that's not a totally protective environment, but arguably it is. And then the other one is, and the other one would be when babies are, for babies, it says here, immersion mimics the safe and protective environment of the womb from which they emerged. And so the idea of immersing your child in the mikvah is a beautiful way of mimicking that symbol, of creating that symbolism as you welcome your child into the covenant. And finally, in the Bible, Abraham washes the feet of the three guests who come and visit him and Sarah in the desert. And so some people at Simchat Bat ceremonies, at welcoming covenant ceremonies for daughters, wash the feet of their daughters, which I think is really beautiful and a wonderful way to welcome them into the covenant. So that's a lot of information in a very short time, but hopefully it gives you like a little taste of why we do some of the things in a circumcision ceremony, and also what some of the thinking is, and how and what some of the creativity is when it comes to expanding this covenantal ceremony to include young girls. Thank you so much. I'm turning things over to my colleague, Rabbi Jeff Goldwasser.
Thank you so much. I'll just mention before I start talking about other things that Rabbi Mendelson, you have boys, I have girls. And in our family, we did a covenant ceremony with both of our girls where we brought the chuppah under which my wife and I were married into the sanctuary, and we ritually washed the baby's feet, as you mentioned, as a welcoming ritual, as a ritual of entering them into the covenant. Interestingly, we haven't settled on like one set ritual for welcoming girls into the covenant, but that was one that I liked, my wife and I liked, and we did it that way. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit now about some of the controversies that emerge in the Jewish world and outside of the Jewish world about circumcision. And you should just know that this, like so many other things in Judaism, there are people who kind of look at this practice of circumcision and say, well, maybe this isn't right for my family, or people who say maybe this isn't right for anybody. And that's certainly been part of the dialogue around circumcision. So first of all, I want to start off by saying, if you ask a physician, if you ask a pediatrician about circumcision, certainly in the United States, what you'll probably hear from them is the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which says that circumcision is a good idea. It's not per se recommended for everyone, but this is the wording from the American Academy of Pediatrics from 2012, which is still the standing recommendation. Evaluation of current evidence indicates that the health benefits of newborn male circumcision outweigh the risks. Furthermore, the benefits of newborn male circumcision justify access to this procedure for families who choose it. And specific benefits from male circumcision were identified for the prevention of urinary tract infections, acquisition of HIV. We already heard something about that. It's why it's so prevalent in Africa, because of its connection to preventing the transmission of HIV, transmission of some sexually transmitted infections, and penile cancer. Male circumcision does not appear to adversely affect penile sexual function, sensitivity, or sexual satisfaction. So, I mean, that's based on scientific studies. I'm not going to say that I think it's 100% accurate, because I'm not a physician and I'm not a medical researcher, but the folks in our country who are best equipped to answer that question, that's what they say about it. And a couple of years after that report came out, there was also a report from the Centers for Disease Control, which wasn't nearly as famous back in 2007, what year was this? Not as famous as it is today. But also the CDC also made a recommendation. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong page. Sorry about that. The CDC has also made a recommendation saying that more recently that the benefits of circumcision outweigh the risks. Okay. On the other hand, there are folks who are very loud about saying that circumcision should not be allowed. And if you are unfortunate enough to do a Google search on controversy circumcision, you will see literally thousands of them. So here's just one example of a headline: is infant male circumcision abuse of the rights of the child? Yes, it is. Folks who say that, this is an example of an elective surgery which is given to someone who is too young to choose to have it, and that it includes trauma, and that it should be outlawed. You'll see other people talk about circumcision psychological damage. The CDC wants all males to be cut, but it's harmful psychologically. As far as I know, there are no actual studies conducted on a scientific basis suggesting that there's psychological damage, but a lot of people are convinced that it is. And here's another one: male circumcision, pain, trauma, and psychosexual sequelae. One of the things that people often claim is that male circumcision prevents people from experiencing sexuality in a fully satisfying way. Again, there is no evidence for that, as that I know of scientifically. In fact, there are several scientific studies that show, for example, if you're interested in knowing the details, that men who are circumcised orgasm just as quickly or, at the same rate as men who are uncircumcised. So there doesn't seem to be a suggestion of that. I'm going to ask for folks, everyone should be muting themselves. I'm hearing some noise in the background, and Zoom meetings just go so much better if everyone mutes themselves when they're not talking. Okay. In fact, there is also an organization in the United States called Intact America that is an advocacy organization that seeks to ban circumcision in the United States. Hasn't been very successful in the United States, been much more successful actually in Europe. There are a number of countries in Europe that have considered legislation banning circumcision, and that sometimes is related to anti-Muslim sentiment because of fears about Muslim immigration into Europe, and sometimes is just the product of good old anti-Semitism as well. I do want to talk about another controversy about circumcision, which is based much more on reality, and Rabbi Mendelson alluded to this earlier. So this is something called Mitsita b'peh, and it's, as Rabbi Mendelson mentioned, it is the practice of the Moel actually removing some of the blood from the circumcision site with his mouth, which to most modern people, you hear that and says, wow, that sounds really gross or peculiar, or throw in whatever adjective you'd like. But it is something that is to this day practiced mostly in the ultra-Orthodox community. Now, instead of just kind of saying, oh, that's gross, no one should do that, I actually want to take a look at the texts that people who do this practice look at as the justification for it, because also it'll give us a little bit of insight of some of where the origins of our ritual practices around circumcision come from. So in the Mishnah, which is kind of the first code of Jewish law that was codified around the year 200 CE, there's a passage that says, one performs all the necessities of circumcision, even on Shabbat, as we've discussed already. One cuts, uncovers, and sucks. And the word in Hebrew that's used for sucks is umutzitzin, and then one places a bandage and cumin. So you can see from this that there was this practice of removing some blood by sucking. It doesn't give specific instructions on how to suck, but it does say that the blood is supposed to be sucked away from the wound. And I've seen some scholarship that says that's probably related to in Hellenistic culture in antiquity, there was a belief about health that had to do with humors, and people felt that in order for proper healing to take place, the humor of blood had to be removed in order for healing to take place properly. It's a kind of a pre-scientific medical notion, and a lot of people, contemporary Orthodox and traditionally observant Jews, look at this and say, look, the intention of this Mishnah is that we should act for the health benefits of the child. However we understand those health benefits to be, if in antiquity they thought it was through sucking, that's what they did, we, with our more modern knowledge about medicine, we should apply what we know to make the child as healthy as possible. Also, you might note about that notion of putting cumin on the wound. I like cumin a lot on my food, but not so much on my penis. But the reason that it's here apparently is in antiquity, they thought that cumin helped with healing, or that it was prevented infection. And so that's probably the reason why that passage is there. So there's commentary on this Mishnah in the Talmud. And there's a very strong statement which has created all of this trouble. So in the Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat, Rav Papa said, a circumciser who does not suck, using the Aramaic terms mitz, which is the equivalent to mutzitzin in Hebrew, a circumciser who does not suck is a danger to the child, and we remove him from the practice. So someone who doesn't actually suck the wound is no longer permitted to be a moel. It's a pretty strong statement. And again, it's a statement that seems to be justified by the understanding of medicine and how medicine worked in the Tannaitic era. So we're talking about, like around the year 300, 400, 500 CE. So not a modern notion of medicine. Okay, by the 19th century, Jewish authorities realized that sucking by mouth could lead to disease, and this was later understood, as it is today, to be the herpes simplex virus that a lot of people, without even knowing that they have herpes, have in their mouths, and that if you suck the wound of a child with a very immature system for preventing infection, you're going to transmit the virus. They ordered that the blood be removed from the circumcised penis by other means, just as the use of cumin has been replaced by other salves. However, the strictest interpretation insists that Mitsita could only be done by mouth. So if you hear about that, that's what that's about. And in fact, this has been a big issue in New York State, where there's a largest contingency of ultra-Orthodox community in the US is in New York State. And the New York State Health Department has actually gone to great lengths of publishing materials, even you'll see here, publishing it in Yiddish to inform people about the dangers of that practice. Okay. I know that we're short on time, so I'm going to rush through a little bit this last part, but I did want to talk about how the use of circumcision, the practice of circumcision, specifically of ritual circumcision, Brit Milah, in the Jewish community has been falling in recent decades. More and more families are deciding not to circumcise their children, partly perhaps because of things that people have heard about psychological damage, or just kind of thinking that it's primitive. And there was actually a New York Times article a couple of years about Jewish families that are deciding not to circumcise. And I thought it was good that Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, was actually quoted in the article and actually saying, well, you know, we're living in an era where it's a choice, and Reform Judaism is about choices. And this is a choice a lot of people are making because it's no longer mandatory. It's no longer, you know, the thing that everyone in American society does. And maybe that's not all a bad thing. And I think he's right about that. The article also did have a description of an innovative ritual that one family chose to do instead of doing traditional Brit Milah, and I think that's good too. So I would recommend that article for anyone who is interested in learning more about the movement away from ritual circumcision. I have to say for myself, I'm a very strong proponent of this ritual, and I want to share with you just something I wrote a few years ago about Brit Milah and what it means to me and what I hope it will mean to other people. So no matter how many I attend, the Brit Milah ceremony always seems the same. There's the father bursting with pride, the mother wondering how she's going to get through the ceremony in which her perfect newborn will be scarred for life, and literally. There are the nervous guests cracking inappropriate jokes. He only took tips. There's the Moel, the person who does the surgery, who tries unsuccessfully to calm everyone's anxieties about the baby's cries. There are the women who smile reassuringly for the mother, the men who stand pale-faced with their hands folded in front of their genitals. It makes for quite a tableau. But there is something else that always is present at a bris that's harder to explain. There's this feeling of being part of a huge unfolding story that includes us all, and that can never be fully told. We're performing a ritual that is stunningly serious, putting a knife to the most vulnerable part of the most vulnerable of all human beings in order to make a stunningly serious statement. Each of us is part of the infinite and eternal. Each of us is present at the beginning of the world, for the birth of every child is a recapitulation of the moment of creation. And each of us is present in the eventual final redemption, for the birth of every child carries with it the possibility of the world's fulfillment. At each Brit Milah, we stand in a timeless time when past and future collide into one endless moment. We recall our future and hope for our past. How does the ritual do this? In part, it's with a paradox. An intense moment in the present allows the past and future to become vividly alive within it. I can't ignore all the obvious and difficult aspects of Brit Milah. Well into the 2nd century of feminism, we still have not figured out a single authoritative way to enter our baby girls into the covenant of God and the Jewish people. There's still some controversy about the ethics of performing elective surgery on an 8-day-old child, but history seems to be on the side of Jewish tradition. There's not a shred of scientific evidence that circumcision is harmful, and there is some evidence of benefits. In many ways, The fact that circumcision raises these problems and concerns is part of why the ritual is still so powerful for us. It takes us out of our comfort zone and into a world of stark realities where blood, love, pain, longing, and eternity commingle. Officiating at a Brit Milah is one of the best parts of being a rabbi. Holding the child, feeling the power of the primal ritual, experiencing a palpable connection to past and future, and falling in love, again, with Jews of all times and places, all make a bris a moment beyond imagining. So I know we've gone over the time that we wanted to do, but I do hope that we might still have a little time for question and answers for those who have questions. So I see one question. Shelley asks, are there any limitations on a boy's participation in Jewish life rituals if he is uncircumcised? Weddings, bar mitzvah, and is he want to date, marry a child in another stream? Okay. So I hear a lot of things that, oh, a child isn't really Jewish if they're not circumcised. And that's not the way Judaism works. You're not excluded from Jewish identity for failure to fulfill a mitzvah, but on the other hand, it's a mitzvah. It's something that you're supposed to do. So from a halachic perspective, the perspective of Jewish law, you're not really disqualified from anything by not being circumcised. Although, there's a social aspect to it. So Shelley, you asked the question about what if he wants to date, marry someone from another stream. I could definitely see there being a problem with someone who is uncircumcised marrying into an Orthodox family, that would definitely raise, and perhaps a conservative or reform family too. That's definitely something that would raise some eyebrows and raise some questions about the viability of a relationship, but that's a social impact, not a halachic impact. I don't know if my other colleagues want to respond to that. Other questions? And you can just unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Rabbi Bernholtz, and I thank you all. I hope this has been a good introduction or elaboration on your knowledge of Brit Milah.
So, no, thank you very much to Rabbi Mendelson, Goldwasser, and to Rabbi Haas. I did ask Rabbi Haas if he had a facsimile of the rock that Abraham used to circumcise himself, as well as that 200-something-year-old Brit Milah kit that they used in Savannah all of those years ago. I think he's still stunned. His children are younger, so he's closer to the experience of Brit Milah than I am. And so it is wonderful we have this opportunity to learn together and to study together. There is coming up, we have a few more weeks. We have, so yes, so Rabbi Haas is going to be auctioning that rock off at some Sotheby's. Thank you, Rob. Or you could sell NTFs of it, NFTs. I'm not sure why I decided to do that, but I am putting into the chat a registration link for Shavuot. So starting on Saturday, June 4th in the evening, there are going to be sessions through the night, study sessions with all sorts of different rabbis. Some of them are sitting here right now. And if you would like to come to that, be part of that virtual Tikkun Leil Shavuot, there are all sorts of Zoom links, and you get the menu of the Zoom links and you come to the classes that you would like to. There is a link in the chat that you are welcome to click on and register with Sinai in Reno, Nevada. That is Rabbi Sarah Zober's congregation. We also have our program coming to us next week. And give me 1 second so I can make sure I get all of the details for that correct. And next week, we are going to be discussing and learning about the observance of yahrzeit and mourning rituals with Rabbi Rebecca Dubois and Rabbi Estelle Mills. And it is wonderful that they are able to join us and share that learning with us. Again, Wednesday at noon Eastern on Zoom on this very same link. And if you would like to watch the rest, if you've missed any of the other sessions, they are available. And finally, one last big thank you to Rabbi Haas, to Rabbi Mendelson, and Rabbi Goldwasser for sharing with us all of that information, that insight into Brit Milah and these incredible welcoming ceremonies. Thank you very much, everyone. And it is wonderful to be able to join together in study. Shavua Tov.